Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the podcast you come to when you're finally ready to take fantasy hockey seriously. My name is Groot Nibbelink. I'm the creator of Apples and Ginos, originator of the Zero-G draft strategy, and in this episode, I am going to break down the most puzzling players league-wide as determined by the Apples and Ginos Discord server. Let's get it. Welcome on into another episode, everyone, on a snowy Monday. So snowy, in fact, that we lost a game. RIP to everyone streaming Los Angeles Kings and Columbus Blue Jackets this week, including myself. Not the way you wanted to open the week, but we'll continue on. Got a couple people in the comments. One, Blake Creamer. I don't know who that could be. Making inappropriate comments as usual. We got Michael in here. Hey, Nate, would appreciate your ranking of two sets of players rest of season in Bangers Cats with no blocks. Forwards are Zuccarello, EP40, Nichushkin, Stamkos, Will Smith. On defense, Lacombe, Jones, Carlson, Dunn. No blocks definitely changes the defense side of things. You're probably leading back into Seth Jones there, assuming health. Yeah, I guess it probably depends on how confident you are in him coming back around and being at full strength. But if you are willing to assume that he does come back at full strength, then probably it's Seth Jones. Obviously, I'm going to give some love to Lacombe here. Carlson and Dunn have probably similar points upside. I'd probably give a slight edge to Carlson in just scoring points, and neither of those guys are really going to hit for you. Lacombe's not a big hitter either. So yeah, it's probably a slight edge to Jones, and then Lacombe, Carlson, Dunn are probably relatively similar. But yeah, that's how I'd have it for the forwards. Without blocks, that does take a chunk out of Elias Pettersson. Zuccarello's scoring a ton of points at the moment. None of these guys are major multi-cat contributors. I mean, Pettersson, I guess, a little bit. Yeah, I honestly think I might go Zuccarello and just lean into the points there. I could see Stamkos continuing with the goals. You know, it might depend on which particular category you're really trying to target. If assists and power play points are worthwhile to target for you, then maybe you go Zuccarello. If you really need the goals, then maybe you lean on Stamkos a little bit. Nichushkin has upside, but we're not getting that right now, and your guess is as good as mine as to when that really starts to come back. So, yeah, I think that's probably what I'd do. I'd either go Zuccarello or Stamkos based on what categories you need to be chasing the most here. All right, we're going to get into the list and then get back to some comments. We're going to start off with a trio of New Jersey Devils: Jesper Bratt, Jack Hughes, and Dougie Hamilton. Now, this has been an ongoing saga, right? The New Jersey Devils in general. We talked to Dmitry Filipovich when we had him on the program. You should definitely go back and check out that episode if you haven't already. It's a pretty short one, just over 30 minutes, so pretty easy to digest and just terrific stuff from Dmitry there. One of my favorite interviews we've ever done on the channel. Basically, he was saying, like, it's been a while that this hasn't really worked to the same degree that it did before, and so maybe we do need to adjust some expectations here. That being said, we have seen a little bit more of signs of life from Jack Hughes in particular here in terms of the underlying metrics. 69th in shots per 60 is pretty nice over the last 5 games. Still up around 21 minutes a night. 75th individual expected goals for per 60. 84th in on-ice expected goals for per 60. So yeah, really nice stuff there from Jack Hughes in terms of the underlyings, which hadn't been so great, especially on the individual side since coming back from the injury. And now it seems like he's rounding into form. So if I had to guess, my best guess moving forward is that Jack Hughes will probably get back to business here. Now, the overall state of affairs in New Jersey might hold him down a little bit from his 110-point upside as a pace rest of season, but I do think that he's going to crush, the 90-point pace rest of season. He's at an 82-point pace, point per game pace currently. I think he's going to crush that, and he should start scoring a few more goals to boot. So I do like Jack Hughes a lot rest of season. Blake and I talked about Jesper Bratt on the flagship show yesterday, so you can obviously check that out as well. His individual stuff is actually pretty concerning, and so that's something I'm keeping an eye on. But at the same time, we have a pretty extensive history of Jesper Bratt being very good, and I'm not ready to throw that away. The environment is so good that even if he doesn't perform very well, even if he has some sort of underlying injury or something going on, I just think that it's going to be better than it has been. 58-point pace on the season for Bratt so far. That's going to get better. There's no way that continues, especially if Hughes is on the mend and shooting more. I think that only means better things for Bratt moving forward as well. Do I think that he's going to go back to, 88 points last year? Do I think he's going to hop right back to that pace? Maybe not in this current environment, the way things are going this year, maybe not. But 70, 75, maybe 80. I could see all of that kind of range of outcomes as a potential point pace for Bratt moving forward. And maybe it takes a little bit longer, but also we have the Olympic break coming up here, be a little bit of a reset for a lot of these teams, and I think we will see some different results when we come back from that, and that'll be an interesting talking point when everybody comes back from the Olympic break, and who benefits and who gets worse, basically, as a result. So something to watch for there. Dougie Hamilton has 6 points in his last 5, almost 21 minutes a night, 25th shots per 60, 19th on ice, expected goals for per 60 amongst all defensemen in those 5 games. Obviously, Luke Hughes is going to be out for a while, and Dougie Hamilton is the direct beneficiary. Do think that he gets moved still, but even in the interim, I think he's a great player to have on your roster, especially if you were one of the lucky ones who picked him up off waivers when he was dropped in your league. Definitely Dougie Hamilton, very exciting player to roster at the moment. Should probably give you, I don't know, if you're assuming he stays on the Devils rest of season, which I'm not, but if you were to assume that, I do think as long as Luke Hughes is out, that he could pace at a 55-point pace here, and that would obviously be pretty good for fantasy purposes, along with all the shots that he's always going to bring. So I think that that's a pretty solid outcome for Hamilton. If he gets moved to another team, that team is, I think it stands to reason that that team would be looking for what he brings to the table, a shot first kind of D-man on the back end, somebody to run the top power play. I don't think I end up relating a lot of these players to the Leafs because the Leafs could use a lot of help, but a team like the Leafs where they haven't had a top power play quarterback that they've been comfortable with this year, that would make a lot of sense if they could acquire Dougie Hamilton. Again, I don't think they're going to do that, but a place like that would make a lot of sense for Dougie Hamilton, and I think he could thrive in a spot like that as well. So I'm not too worried about him being traded and being, instantly diminished down the lineup. There are a few places that could happen, but I think it's more likely than not that he goes somewhere where he can be a top power play quarterback. Brandt Clark has 3 points in his last 5, 21.5 minutes average time on ice. We'd love to see it. 28th in shots per 60, 6th individual expected goals for per 60, 36th in on ice expected goals for per 60. He's now on a 41-point pace on the season. I love Brandt Clark. I love everything that he brings to the table. I think that it's still Jim Hiller's Los Angeles Kings, and as long as it is Jim Hiller's Los Angeles Kings, we're going to be a little bit muted on the output for Brandt Clark. Probably this 45-ish point range, maybe 50-point range if he runs a little bit hot, if the Kings, do a little better in the last 30 games here of the season. Could be in that 45 to 50-point range, and that wouldn't be too surprising. Hopefully, Hiller is out of the way next year, and we can be really excited about a full Brandt Clark breakout to 60-plus point potential, which I think he absolutely has in the bag. Boone Jenner here, 2 assists in his last 5, 17 minutes average time on ice, 297th in shots per 60, 287 individual expected goals for per 60, 355 in on ice expected goals for per 60. It's been a little bit of a tough stretch in the last few games here for Mr. Boone Jenner. Playing on that line with Sean Monahan and Kent Johnson. Obviously, we're not going to get this game here on Monday to try to get an idea of what might be next for Boone Jenner. I think mostly this is probably just some natural regression. He still has a 76% IPP on the season, which is really high, but his shooting percentage is kind of low. His on-ice shooting percentage is on the lower side, so it's kind of just a weird way that he's gotten to this 55-point pace that he's currently on in the 37 games that he has played. So overall, I think Boone Jenner is solidly in the streamer tier for me. In a Bangers Cats, maybe you're hanging on to him. In like a 12-team Bangers Cats, you're hanging on to him maybe even through some bad weeks here. But I don't think you have to view Boone Jenner playing on line 2, line 3, middle 6 minutes basically on power play 2. I don't think you have to view Boone Jenner as a guy you have to hang on to at the moment, unfortunately. Elias Pettersson, 2 assists in his last 5, just under 18 minutes average time on ice. I forgot. I did want to double check on that and just make sure there wasn't a game where he just had an artificially low time on ice. He had the one game where he's at 14-18 time on ice, and I wasn't sure if that, maybe we got some Vancouver fans in here. The game against New Jersey, he played only 14-18. I don't know if he missed some time there or what happened in that game, but that's obviously dragging down his average time on ice a little bit here. He's more in the 19-minute range if you take that out of the equation. Either way, 309th in shots per 60, 243 individual expected goals for per 60, 116 on ice expected goals for per 60 there in these last 5 games, 58-point pace on the season. I'm just struggling to see how it's going to get much better for Pettersson on the season. He could run a little bit hotter on the IPP, I guess, and that could get him into the 60 to 65 point range as a point pace rest of the season. But quite honestly, I think we're going to have to live with this 55 to 60 points somewhere in here. So that's where I'm at on Pettersson at the moment. Mika Zibanejad was asked about 3 goals, 7 points in his last 5. I actually haven't checked. They're playing right now. It's 3-2 Boston, 7 minutes left in the second. Zibanejad does have an assist on a JT Miller goal. So add another assist to the total here. Almost 22 minutes a night for Zibanejad. 88th in shots per 60, but 233rd in individual expected goals for per 60. Also 88th in on-ice expected goals for per 60. And a 34-goal, 77-point pace on the season for Zibanejad. Blake and I talked about Zibanejad and Miller on the flagship show as well, so you can go back and check that out. I think Zibanejad stays on the Rangers. I think that Panarin leaving town is probably a net negative for Zibanejad and everybody basically on the Rangers, and it seems like a foregone conclusion that Panarin will move. Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts was positing that it could be Anaheim that could be in on that if Panarin would be willing to go there. That would obviously be pretty exciting for fantasy purposes. What he could do with some of the young studs there would be pretty fun to watch. There are obviously other teams in the mix too. Lots of places that he might end up. Nothing is settled at this point. I think that Zibanejad probably has a bit of a shelf life at the rate that he has been going, this 77-point pace. He's gotten there with a 75% IPP on the high side, 15% shooting percentage on the high side relative to his career average. 11.7% on ice shooting percentage probably comes down with Panarin out of the picture. So, yeah, I think this is a bit of a sell-high moment on Zibanejad. The tough part of that is that the Rangers do have a pretty good playoff schedule for fantasy purposes, and so you kind of have to weigh what you're getting if you are selling on Zibanejad. Maybe somebody else in your league wants to acquire Zibanejad for that playoff schedule, and you can actually kind of trade up and get a better player than Zibanejad moving forward. So that could be a potential spot worth checking out. Just find out what the value of Zibanejad is, especially while he's on this hot streak here. I'm going to do Connor Bedard here, and then I'll get back to the comments. Bedard has just 2 points in his last 5, still skating 20 minutes a night, 82nd in shots per 60, but similar to Zibanejad, down at 209th in individual expected goals for per 60, also 239th in on-ice expected goals for per 60 over the last 5 games. Still in the 39 games he's played, he's on a 101-point pace. And his ranks are obviously higher on the season. 83% IPP is insane. 15.6% shooting percentage might be a touch high for him, but definitely not insane. 14.4% on ice shooting percentage is probably on the high side for a guy even as talented as Bedard being on Chicago, that's probably some regression was due there. So yeah, I do think it probably comes down off this 100-point pace for Bedard moving forward. Logically, that would make some sense. The Chicago Blackhawks could sell a few of their wingers. Guys like Teravainen or Bertuzzi might actually, be worth something on the open market, and so they might get an offer they feel like they can't refuse just for where they're at as a team. That could definitely happen. So that could all kind of conspire against Bedard maintaining this pace that he's currently on. But I do think it's pretty clear that we're seeing a level up from Bedard this year. I think he maintains the 40-goal pace, but maybe the overall point pace drops down, somewhere between 80 and 90 points as a pace rest of season. I think we might be looking at just a little bit off the top for Bedard moving forward. All right, let's get back to the comments here. Nightbane 420, got one for you. Who's the best around? Apples and Ginos, keep it up. I appreciate you there. Dynasty Dave's in here with the hashtag Zergy, appreciate you. Nightbane has a question here, listing the bottom of my roster to see who I should ship out. Jonathan Toews, Brett Clark, Owen Tippett, Victor Olofsson, Riley. Is that the way that it's spelled is the Mike Riley way, but I'm assuming that's Morgan Riley. Heineman and Svechnikov have to drop 2 as Wedgie is back and Toews is coming back. Of that group, I don't think Olofsson hangs on to this top power play, top line deployment there with Colorado for much longer, personally. We talked about that a little bit on the flagship show as well. I just don't think it's the most likely setup for success moving forward. I think Ross Colton and Landeskog both being out has kind of pushed him into that spot where they tried to balance out the second line a little bit, put Lehkonen and Nichushkin with Brock Nelson, get that line going a little bit, and obviously it worked against Toronto. Nelson with the hat trick there. I think that Olofsson would be one of the drops. Heineman is a guy who shoots a lot, hits a lot. Depending on your settings, maybe that's super valuable to you and you don't want to get rid of that, but he's probably another one. And Jonathan Toews is also a guy, is on top power play still in Winnipeg at the moment, but I don't think it's a guy that you have to hang on to. It's going to be pretty hit or miss. He doesn't provide a lot peripherally, and so it would be between Heineman and Toews for me, kind of depending, I guess, on what you need more. Toews, I think, will score a few more points than Heineman moving forward, but Heineman's going to have a lot better peripherals. Also asking, should I drop a third to free up a streamer slot for week 23? For the schedule, got Jarvis, so I can live without Svechnikov. I think you should hang on to Svechnikov there. I dropped the others first for sure. Rest are schedule plays. Sure, yeah, schedule plays. Play in there. I don't think I'm planning for week 23 with the bottom of my roster this way. Like, I'm still using them for streaming at this point. Yeah, I think a lot is going to transpire between here and week 23, and so trying to project what Emil Heineman is going to do in week 23 of the fantasy season is not a business that I'm really interested in right now. I think that's looking too far in the future for a player who's not a solidified player, in terms of his role still, in terms of what he's able to do at the NHL level. So yeah, just that kind of premise of framing the bottom of your roster for week 23 already, even if you're in a really good spot in terms of your position within your league, if you're first, even if you won every single matchup so far, I'm just not looking to do that with the bottom of my lineup so far. I'm staying open to whatever's on the waiver wire, taking guys that I think have a lot of upside who might be difference makers in that week 23, and so I wouldn't that's just not how I'd approach a guy like Heineman, a guy like Jonathan Toews, a guy like Victor Olofsson. The collab with Dom was awesome. Appreciate that. I'm glad that she thought so as well. How do you feel about Bo Horvat from your predictions before the season versus rest of season? I should probably pull up my preseason projections if I'm going to talk about them. Make sure I don't perjure myself too much on that. Where are the New York Islanders on this list? Let's see what we've got. Bo Horvat, I had for 33 goals, 27 assists, 60 points at the beginning of the season. What was he pacing for? Bo Horvat was on pace for 47 goals and 73 points. Had really good underlying stats as well. 70% IPP, running a bit hot with the 16.7% shooting percentage. Yeah, I think that based on the underlying stats, I think I would be higher on Horvat than I was at the beginning of the season. I don't know that the 47 goal pace is sustainable. I don't know that the 73 point pace is necessarily sustainable. But I do think he could rest of season still be in that 35 to 40. Yeah, around the 40 goal range I think would be reasonable for him, and that would probably put him more in a 65-ish point range. So yeah, I think it's definitely gone up from where it was, and especially on the goal scoring side, because he's just been shooting more. He's been more dangerous this year than I had anticipated, and so I think I would try to project for that appropriately moving forward. But yeah, not a huge uptick in terms of the points, but more so on the goals, more so on the individual expected goals is where I'd see the increase for Horvat. Can we look under the hood of Morgan Rielly, please? We definitely can. I don't know if we're going to like what we see. We're going to have good shots. He has been shooting 13th in shots per 60, but 65th in individual expected goals for per 60. A lot of those shots coming from distance. Third in on-ice expected goals for per 60. He's playing on the top power play. That stuff's all happening. 3 assists in the last 22 minutes. The thing here is, right, like, with defenseman injured, Tanev apparently getting close to coming back, so that would obviously be a big boost and could lead to a decline in Rielly's minutes. 48-point pace. I just don't see it getting better than this 48-point pace for Rielly rest of season. 10-goal, 48-point pace. That's probably about where it tops out, even with top power play rest of season. So yeah, the underlying numbers are pretty solid. The shots are a little deceiving, but they do count for fantasy, I think. A lot of Rielly's shots are pretty low risk, and really he's hoping for a tip or hoping for a weak rebound or something like that with a lot of his shots, I think. But they do still count for fantasy, especially if you have a big shots weight in your league. So that's obviously something to keep in mind as well. Today's postponed game hurts. Kempe, Clark, Jenner, Marchment. Who's the drop at the end of the week between Jenner and Marchment in a Cats Bangers? That's going to be Jenner for me, no doubt, at the moment. I guess, if Jenner switched spots with Marchment, top line, top power play, then yeah, I'd go that route. It's not that there's such a big difference between the two players that I wouldn't follow the deployment in that scenario. But if the deployment holds, I'd stick with Marchment. Weinster asks, Nate Dogg, thoughts on Victor Hedman's return? Seems unlikely he'll take over Radish's power play 1 spot. What's your rest of season outlook on him? Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. Dimitri mentioned this too when he was on the pod, that he thinks that most likely they ease Hedman back in. They let Radish and Moser kind of do what they've been doing all year and let Hedman, ease back in, hopefully not re-injure himself for a second time here, and just kind of get ready for playoffs. And yeah, that'll be less minutes than he's used to. It'll probably mean no power play 1 time that he's been used to. And so that probably takes him down into the 40 to 45 point pace range. The other problem is that Hedman's peripherals have obviously gone down a lot in recent years and will probably continue to go down because he's coming back from an injury. And so that part as well, I think, is something to consider, is that the peripherals will also not be there. So you're left with a 40 to 45 point defenseman with not great peripherals. It's probably just going to be a little bit underwhelming when Hedman comes back, and it's definitely not going to be the Hedman of old, in my view. Obviously, things could change. He could be on power play 1. Radish could have a cold streak right before Hedman comes back, and they could try Hedman right back on power play 1. These are all things that could happen, but the way I see it, and the way that most people that I've talked to whose opinion I trust see it, is that Radish is probably going to stick on power play 1, and Hedman's role will be diminished when he comes back. Going off what you guys said about Miller yesterday, who do you think has a better point pace rest of season, Miller, Leo Carlson, or Point? Was offered Leo or Point for my Miller or Forsberg in a points only? That's a pretty interesting proposition. I think Carlson has the highest upside in points only there, but it definitely matters if he comes back at full strength. And obviously Braden Point, if and when he comes back at full strength, would obviously be a huge boost as well. I think I would take Point number 1. I think I would go with Carlson number 2 and Miller number 3, but Miller and Carlson are really close for me. I think if it is points only, I think I would take Point over Miller rest of season. You may want to factor the playoffs into that conversation as well, the playoff schedules and whatnot, but just based purely on point pace, what I expect rest of season, I think I would take Point over Miller. Pecora says the pod with Dimitri was such a legendary collab. Appreciate that. Yeah, it was so much fun. Hope we get to do that more of that. Who gets more points from now to end of season, Jack Hughes or Marner? It's a good question. I want to say Jack Hughes, but I'm not 100% convinced on that take. Marner, 19 minutes on average lately, 20 minutes on the season, just over a point per game. Good underlying numbers. His IPP's on the lower side. Obviously, stuff runs through Jack Eichel on the power play a bit more, so that's probably a bit of that. On-ice shooting percentage is still quite high at 14%. Interesting couple of guys to compare here. I think I would take Jack Hughes. I think he's got more upside, even in New Jersey. Yeah, I think I would take Jack Hughes, but I wouldn't be confident about it. Jack Hughes is definitely the more boom or bust option of those two. Breadman says, some juicy players dropped in my league yesterday. How do you rank Doan, Evangelista, and Leonard? I wish they had a good schedule this week. Yeah, it probably depends on what you need them for. If it is Bangers Cats, then Doan has a bit more of that than Evangelista. Evangelista is pretty much an assist merchant at the moment. Leonard obviously hits more as well. Going into next week, it's pretty weird schedules. Doan will get a couple off nights there. The Sabres play 3 games in 4 days before the Olympic break kicks in. So that's obviously going to be pretty nice for fantasy purposes. That being said, so do the Predators. They just play one more on a heavy night. And Leonard for the Capitals. The Capitals, they also have 3 games in 4 nights and 2 on off nights, so not too bad for the Capitals either. Yeah, I think at this moment in time, I'd be inclined to take... I think Doan's role is more secure, but his underlines have been a bit troubling as of late. Evangelista did get back on the top line in the line rushes today. Yeah, I think I'll take Evangelista there just in pure point space, but it's definitely not set in stone. It could change by the end of this week, my take on that, just based on how this week plays out. All right. Hey man, got offered Reinhart, Lacombe, and Hellebuck for Jack Hughes, Sergachev, and Ottinger. Standard points league thoughts. So obviously, if Jack Hughes hits ceiling, he's the top player here. Lacombe and Sergachev roughly cancel each other out. Hellebuck and Ottinger roughly cancel each other out. Yeah. I think I'm sticking on the Jack Hughes side here. I think it's a fair trade. I think it's kind of 1-for-1 across the board. And it's a relatively fair trade. It kind of depends on if you give the edge to Lacombe over Sergachev, or if you give the edge to Hellebuck over Ottinger or something like that, and give the edge to Hughes over Reinhart. Probably works out across the board. I just don't know that I'd make this trade in either direction. I don't feel that strongly about it. So, yeah, I just... If I don't feel strongly about it, I just don't make those trades. So probably in this case, I don't think I'd do it. Bratt was dropped. Drop Barzal or Schmaltz for him. Either or. Yeah, I think I'd probably go Barzal first. I know, the Islanders are winning 3-0 here tonight. I'm just not convinced that that's something that's going to sustain. And so I would be a little bit concerned about that moving forward. Yeah, I'm more concerned about the Islanders than I am about Utah, for example. So yeah, I'm thinking about dropping Barzal to get Bratt there. But either I would drop for Bratt at this point in time. So no big qualms with dropping either. Need 0G expertise. I'm making playoffs, no buy. Which goalie do we like from Greaves, Allmark, Monty? Also in a Cats league with... Okay, let's do the first part of this question first. From Greaves, Allmark, and Montembeau, I think that they all have different levels of upside. I think it's probably Allmark for me, assuming that things kind of go Ottawa's way a little bit more than they have in the past. I think it's still a good defensive environment there. I think Allmark is still a good goalie underneath it all. And if he's in a better place now, which I hope he is, then I think that he has the biggest upside there. So I think I would still go Allmark because really that's all I'm doing with goalies. I'm always constantly chasing upside. I think Allmark's got it the most there. So the other part of the question, also in a Cats league with goals, assists, power play points, shorthanded points, plus minus, shots on goal, hits, wins, save percentage, and shutouts. How many goalies to carry? 2 to 3 usually. You could stream a fourth just to get a just a 1 game stream here or there on occasion, but definitely between 2 to 4 at any given time. That's where I'd probably be at. It does depend also on how many bench spots you have. I'm kind of assuming, a more standard 4 or 5 player bench. So if you had more bench, then obviously you could stand to roster more goaltenders. But assuming it's more of a standard setup, it would be between 2 to 4. I'd be trying to lock down a couple of goalies that I think are getting the vast majority of their starts for their teams, and then be rotating through a third on and off, basically. Could I get your thoughts on Nelson? Wondering if he's a sell high. Absolutely. We can throw Brock Nelson into the sheet. 5 goals, 7 points in his last 5. Over 20 minutes a night. 37 shots per 60. 32nd individual expected goals for per 60. And 12th in on-ice expected goals for per 60. On a 44-goal, 74-point pace on the season. 23% shooting percentage. Brock Nelson is a guy who rocks a very high shooting percentage a lot of the time. So 23% is definitely high even for him, but he is a guy who can sustain a higher number than most would suspect. I think he's definitely a sell high at this level. But I also don't know that, like, Brock Nelson is probably still not like a fully name brand value player, and so I don't know if you're going to get 44 goal, 74 point pace value for Brock Nelson still. If you're able to, then I think I would try to make that trade. Yeah, I'd be investigating it for sure. I think he classifies as a sell high if you can get full value on what he's currently producing for you. San Jose has the easiest strength of schedule rest of season. Both Ned and Askarov are available. Is their starter a target? Probably depends on your setup. If you need more rate stats, I don't think they're going to give that to you. If just pure volume is of interest to you, then I think they will give that to you. Obviously, that situation's gotten a bit murkier in recent days with Nedeljkovic getting more starts there. So yeah, you'll have to kind of play it by ear a little bit, but definitely depending on your situation, like right now, you might want to go with Nedeljkovic, but I could see that flipping and wanting to go with Askarov, so it's something to keep monitoring moving forward for sure. Hi, I need some help with a trade. Cats League, goals, assists, shots on goal, power play points, blocks, hits, plus minus. Someone offered Tage and Stützle for Sider and Caulfield. Should I accept? Sider's a huge value in this league with the hits and blocks. Sider's probably the most valuable player in this trade right now. Tage is obviously going off. Yeah. Maybe if you have like a bunch of other defensemen and you don't really need Sider, which would be hard to imagine given how much of a beast he's been this year. But yeah, if you happen to have a really good decor even without Sider, then maybe I'd consider it. But in most cases, I think I'm just hanging on. It's not enough to make me conclusively say again that it's better for you to accept. All right. Moving on. Hey, Nate, thanks for the show. No problem. Thoughts on Gauthier versus Svechnikov rest of season? Gauthier with slightly better playoff in our league. 8-team head-to-head, redraft head-to-head. Relatively standard settings there. Yeah, I'm taking Gauthier there pretty conclusively for me. He's got an assist in this game against Edmonton already in the first half of the first period on the power play. Love to see that. Yeah, I just think Gauthier has more upside. I think he's a better player at base level. Brindamore, could always drop down Svechnikov down the lineup at any given moment. Could happen right in your playoffs. I just don't think that's as likely to happen to Gauthier moving forward. So yeah, that's where I'm at currently. I'll take Gauthier there pretty conclusively. Traded Wyatt Johnson for Karel Vejmelka. Okay. Wins, goals against, average, and saves. Yeah, I mean, you're going to get wins. You're going to get saves. Vejmelka gets nearly every start for Utah. Big-time workhorse. Yeah, you're going to get stuff there. Obviously, I prefer to do my goalies a different way, but yeah. Would you drop Morgan Riley 50 for Hedman return? I have Radish keeping him. I don't really want to roster Hedman and Riley on the same team. But yeah, I think Riley and Hedman will probably be relatively comparable once Hedman's back. Yeah, you could do it either way. I think I would rather trade Hedman when he comes back to someone. I think you'd probably get a better return than you would for Riley. And yeah, I think I just don't want to roster both Radish and Hedman because what's good for one player is bad for the other. And yeah, that's a tough place to be. Standard ESPN points league. Would you do Barzal for Jesper Bratt? Yes, I would take Bratt in that spot. Frank says 0G ain't working for me this season. Last in goalie stats, trying to salvage the season. Yeah, I mean, the thing with 0G, like I've always said, you gotta find someone in the draft, or you've got to continually find these people throughout the year. There are different settings, like you're in a roto league here, like you said. If you have limited ads, then obviously it becomes a lot harder to stream goaltenders throughout the year because you have those limited ads and you can't be looking as often for the next big thing. But like whoever got Vejmelka did not pay a big price for Vejmelka, and now you're looking at trading Wyatt Johnson for Vejmelka. So you have the evidence right there that, if you had picked Vejmelka instead, and I'm not saying that, you're dumb to not pick Vejmelka. Like Vejmelka was a target for us in the offseason, but that was pretty much solely because, Utah, pretty good team, and Vejmelka in line to get a bunch of volume, and that was really the extent of the thought process, and that's kind of how you do it. So yeah, it is something that requires a ton of work in season, though. I'm not discounting that. It's definitely something that's not for everybody. Thank you for your help. Bless soul. I'll look to trade Riley or Hedman. Bless your soul. No problem. All right, back to the list we go. We have got to talk about one Roope Hintz. Hintz has 4 assists, no goals in his last 5, 19 minutes a night, 214 shots per 60, 117 individual expected goals for per 60, 27th in on-ice expected goals for per 60. Hintz is a top power play guy there in Dallas, and that power play has been electric, continues to be. His IPP is way down at 51%, but his on-ice shooting percentage is insanely high at 16.8%. Unbelievable number there. I don't know if I've ever seen a number that high, except for Mark Stone, who we'll get to. Overall, 24 goal, 70-point pace on the season. That's kind of where I think he's going to live. He is more assist guy than scorer. And so, yeah, I think 24 goals, 70-point pace, that's about where he'll live. Maybe he could get a little bit luckier with the shooting percentage. He is 23rd on the season in individual expected goals for per 60, so that's a huge number, and he hasn't quite been rewarded for that. So he could creep more towards the 30-goal pace, but I don't think the points pace is going to go much higher there. Barzal, 4 assists, no goals in his last 5, 19 minutes average time on ice, 319th in shots per 60, 312 in individual expected goals for per 60, 95th in on-ice expected goals for per 60, 18 goals, 67-point pace for Barzal, almost 21 minutes a night. I just think the Islanders don't have finishing talent that would really set up Barzal to be in a great place. Obviously, Horvat missing time is really not helping him as of late, especially on the power play. I think that Barzal deserves better than this. I don't know that it's going to happen in this iteration of the Islanders. Matthew Shaver helps, but he probably needs he needs a finisher on his line, a winger who can actually put the puck in the net with regularity, and they've just never found that for him through most of his prime here on Long Island. And so until they do, I keep thinking that it's going to happen for Barzal because you see how dynamic he is. You see the microstats are absolutely jumping off the page with Barzal, but he has trouble turning it into fantasy points consistently. I don't know that it's going to get much better than this 67-point pace for Barzal rest of season at this point. I think it might get a little bit better, but probably not by orders of magnitude. Patrick Kane, 2 assists in his last 5, 18 minutes, average time on ice, 201st shots per 60, 269 individual expected goals for per 60, 117 in on ice expected goals for per 60. In the last game, was still playing with Kopp and DeBrincat at even strength. Did find some time on the top power play. Van Riemsdyk was also finding some time on that top power play unit, so I'm not exactly sure what the breakdown was there, what exactly happened. I don't think we got any updates on power play stuff. They ran. Oh, we did get another update. So it was still JVR net front on top power play in practice today. So Kane's still power play 2. Missed that one earlier today. 65-point pace on the season. Still good underlyings on the season. 8.3% shooting percentage is obviously low for him. I think he can live in this range even without top power play. With top power play, I think he'd push more into the 70 to 75 point kind of range. But they're really using that line at even strength, that Kopp to Brinkett Kane line at even strength, and so he'll get some run there. He'll get some points there. I think he kind of is what he is. 20, 25 goal, 60, 65 point pace rest of season on power play 2. If he gets power play 1, it jumps to that 70 to 75 point pace. Jordan Kyrou, 3 goals, 5 points in his last 5, 17 and a half minutes average time on ice, 58th in shots per 60, 127 individual expected goals for per 60, and 72nd in on ice expected goals for per 60. I've been talking about Kyrou as a player that I want to keep an eye on because he's been dropped in a lot of places, and he's just a guy who has, like, we've seen the proof of concept. We know how talented this player is, playing on top power play, playing on a line with Buchnevich and Neighbors at even strength currently. It's about as good as it gets in St. Louis right now, honestly. The environment will probably hold him down a bit, but he's individually talented enough to make this really work, I think, still. And so, I've said before, I think I said last week when talking with Blake, that I could see a scenario where Kyrou is a guy who just pops at a 70-plus point pace rest of season, whether he stays in St. Louis, whether St. Louis goes and sells some players and Kyrou's sold to another team. I think it's probably a better situation, honestly, than what he's got here in St. Louis in terms of line mates, no matter where he goes. I'm pretty bullish on Kyrou's rest of season here. It could also, I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture. Like, obviously, Montgomery has said his piece on Kyrou in the past, and it could turn south very quickly again. So, I mean, don't sell the farm for Kyrou or anything. But I'm just always going to be in on talent, and Kyrou is talent. And that's really obvious to see. Whether or not that talent necessarily results in fantasy points for us is still up for debate, but I want to be in on the talent because it's way easier for a guy with a ton of talent to score fantasy points than it is for a guy with no talent to defy the odds and hit some insanely high percentages just to get there. Timo Meier, another Devil here, just 2 points in his last 5. 18 minutes a night, though, 36 shots per 60, 5th individual scoring chances for per 60, 82nd in individual expected goals for per 60, and down at 238 in on-ice expected goals for per 60. It's been very puzzling with Timo Meier. He was playing on that line with Jesper Bratt and Jack Hughes in the last game. Not on the top power play because Connor Brown was on the top power play in the last game. Thanks for that, Sheldon Keefe, mastermind of all masterminds. 47-point pace for Meier on the season despite being ranked 10th in the league in shots per 60. Mind-boggling stuff. 8.2% shooting percentage, 9% on-ice shooting percentage. I think it gets better for Meier. I know that's hollow hollow reassurance for all the people rostering Meyer right now. But the shots are there. The Devils are so unlucky. It has to turn at some point, at least to some degree. And I don't know that Meyer's going to have like a big pop-off section to his season to end it here, but I do think it gets better. I think he can score at least like a 55-ish point pace the rest of season. And with the peripherals that he provides, that's probably good enough to keep him in your lineup. Josh Dolan, a player that we mentioned on the podcast, Blake and I did in the flagship show as a cold streak here. Just over 15 minutes average time on ice, 392 shots per 60, 393 individual expected goals for per 60, despite being on the top line with Thompson and Tuck and the top power play. Pretty puzzling. Good player to bring up in puzzling players this 5-game stretch here for Josh Doan. I think it gets better. Most likely just a random cold stretch. His numbers look really good on the season. 42nd in individual expected goals for per 60, 25th in on-ice expected goals for per 60 on the season. So all that's really popping for Josh Doan on the season-long look. The only qualm I would have is if he is playing through, some sort of injury, and that's maybe an explanation for why the individual stats are down the way they are. I don't really see that in his game, like visually. So I think it gets better, but it is a player that I'm looking at a lot closer right now just because of these really bad individual metrics in the last 5. A trio of Blue Jackets here: Charlie Coyle, Mason Marchment, Kent Johnson. Coyle has 4 points in his last 5. Marchment has 4 points in his last 2 games here. And Kent Johnson, 3 points in the last 5. Coyle up over 18.5 minutes. Marchment just approaching 18 minutes per game. And Kent Johnson under 16. Kent Johnson has seen his ice time just bandied about by Rick Bowness. The first few games, he's getting big minutes. Had one game over 20 minutes. The last 2 games, 11-15 and 13-12. That's going to be tough to play through and tough to score points with. He is on the top power play still as of this recording. So there is at least that still going for Kent Johnson. But yeah, I don't know if we're going to get the minutes required to make Kent Johnson a thing in 2026. So that's definitely the guy I'm the lowest on of these 3. Charlie Coyle, 64th in individual expected goals for per 60. That part still looks pretty decent. 53-point pace. 70% IPP is insanely high for a guy like Charlie Coyle. I don't think that sustains, but the deployment is better now than it was at the time, or for most of the season, I should say. I think Coyle, as long as he's on top power play, is a pretty good streaming option. Maybe a guy that you consider hanging on to even outside of this great schedule week for Columbus. But yeah, it's a guy with a short leash still for sure. Mason Marchment, as long as he's on that top line with Fantilli and Marchenko, I have to be interested because that's a place where somebody could really pop off. He did also get on that top power play for a bit there. So that's another piece that I'm looking at for Marchment, is if he can score some line 1, power play 1, get some big minutes. A player that we've seen pop off in lesser minutes in previous seasons. Wouldn't be too surprising if, being maybe a bit of a bigger fish in a smaller pond here in Columbus, if he turns things around on the season here and has a nice closeout alongside some dynamic guys like Fantilli and Marchenko. All right, we got 3 more to go here, but I want to get back to the comments before we close it out there. To continue the theme tonight, Hintz or Bratt. That's a pretty interesting pair of players. I think I would still take Bratt there rest of season. Hintz is definitely safer. Hintz, I feel very confident, is going to hit this 70 points. I think Bratt has more upside. Yeah, I think Bratt has more upside still. And so if I have the ability to chase upside and I'm not just trying to keep the floor of my team steady with Hintz, then I would still take Bratt there, but it's very close. Pretty comparable players. How's my D look with Harley, Falk, Klingberg, Doughty, 14 team, and APL points? It's not the best I've ever seen. I'll say that. Is Timo or Fantilli worth dropping for Bratt? Probably, probably, probably either. Honestly, it may depend. Like if it's a full bangers cats, then maybe Timo and Fantilli, both like hitters and shooters, bring enough in those categories that it's not actually worth it. But if it's more of a point setup, I think Brat will outscore both of those guys in raw points rest of season. And so if it's a bit more points only or leans more that way in terms of the points weight, then I would go towards Brat there. But yeah, probably depends on your format. Wanted to hear some thoughts if Alex Laferriere is a long-term hold despite no power play 1 deployment. 12-team bangers league. Goals worth 6, assists worth 4, penalty minutes worth 0.5, power play points 2, shorthanded points 3, shots on goal 0.7, hits 0.8, and blocks 1. Wow, that's a huge weight on hits. Yeah, Laferriere in that setup for the amount of hits that he throws, the little bits of offense that he's able to bring to the table, I definitely think he's a potential hold in that setup, especially almost 21 minutes a night in the last little bit. Yeah, 21 goal, 39 point pace, but with the hits being that high, I have to imagine he's actually pretty high up. Yeah, that's a big hits weight. BB Stars, would you trade Patrick Kane and Hedman for Fantilli? Also roster Lacombe, Hudson, Dunn, Dougie Hamilton, and Brant Clark in a points-only league. Points only is tough. Patrick Kane can probably equal Fantilli in points. I think Fantilli might have a touch more upside, especially if this power play 2 treatment for Patrick Kane continues. It's very clear that you don't necessarily need Hedman, though, given the other D that you have there. I think I would aim higher than that if I could, than Fantilli in terms of points upside. I think it could hit. I think Fantilli very easily could go on a big run to end the season here, end on a 30-game stretch where he scores at a 70, 75 point pace. I think that's definitely possible. I'm not necessarily convinced, though. I think there's probably some others that I'd try to trade those two for before going to Fantilli and points only. What do you think about trading Gunther for point stash? APL points looking to be a lock for first, second for playoff bye. Utah has a pretty weak playoff schedule. It feels bad because, yeah, obviously Gunther is scoring a ton. Goal pace is pretty crazy. Shooter, whereas point is none of those things basically. I get what you're trying to do. I'm just not sure. I feel like you might be able to aim away from points a little bit, or maybe do a bit more of a 2-for-2 where you get a little bit extra on somebody else, maybe improve your defense as well. I think I'd try to tweak that trade a little bit before sending it. Wondering if Vic Olofsson line 1 power play 1 deployment can stick. If there's one thing we know about Jared Bednar is he's always going to move those things around, so no. Thoughts on trying to move a center like Tavares or Nelson for Dougie, rostering 4C currently with Tavares, Nelson, Crosby, or Horvat? Yeah, I don't think that's crazy. I think it's probably an overpay for either of those for Dougie specifically. Yeah, I might try some other D first and try to go up a little higher, especially with Nelson being as hot as he is right now. But yeah, I see what you're trying to do, and I think you're on the right path in terms of trying to get away from having 4C. All right, we got some thanks rolling in here. No problem. I'm going to do the last 3 here, and we'll get out of here. Braden Point was asked about. Obviously, we don't exactly have a ton of data on him in the last little bit. But yeah, I do think we should get Braden Point back to something close to full strength. There's obviously always going to be the concern that, especially with the Olympics this year, I think there are going to be guys that push to get back for the Olympics or push to get back during the Olympics and play in the Olympics and maybe don't let themselves heal as well as they should, and as a result may be a little bit yeah, a little bit of a lesser version of themselves for the rest of the NHL season. And so that is a concern for me with Point. It's always a concern with any player who gets injured that they, when they come back, it's just not as good as it was before. We see that a lot. And so that is in my mind. But Point's underlying numbers were unbelievable. Tampa Bay continues to have really good underlying numbers as a team. Yeah, Point was 4th in individual expected goals for per 60 and 12th in on-ice expected goals for per 60. So you could take a pretty substantial haircut there and still roll out almost a point per game pace rest of season. And it wouldn't be too shocking. So yeah, I think baseline expectation for Point when he comes back is still close to a point per game pace. Will Cooley, 2 points in his last 5, just over 14 minutes average time on ice. They did try this 5-forward power play. There looks like tonight, it looks like tonight they've gone back to Gavrikov as the power play 1 quarterback there. Cooley, 177 shots per 60, 132 individual expected goals for per 60. This game he's skating with Brennan Othman and Noah Laba. That's not going to cut it for fantasy purposes. He's basically a hit streamer to me at this point with a little bit of extra juice in terms of the offense, but nothing exciting for sure. Not a guy that I would say you have to hang on to, especially outside of a Bangers Cats. And lastly here on the list, Mark Stone, 3 goals, 6 points in his last 5, 19.5 minutes average time on ice, 225 shots per 60, 271 individual expected goals for per 60, 15th in on ice expected goals for per 60. So on a 47 goal, 122 point pace in the 35 games that he's played this year. 24% shooting percentage, definitely going to come down. 17.2% on ice shooting percentage, definitely going to come down, but still going to be great in terms of the points that he's able to put up. So good on that power play as well. I think Stone can hit a 90-point pace rest of season pretty comfortably in this current setup, as long as nothing else changes kind of around him, other injuries or anything like that. I still don't love it. It's Mark Stone. His body appears to be held together by duct tape at this point, but as long as he's in the lineup, I think he's going to be a huge asset for fantasy still. All right, we have one last comment, and then I'm going to get out of here and close this thing out. Pecora asked for thoughts on Jeek and Patrick Kane for Konechny in a Bangers Cats. Let's take a look at Konechny. I haven't taken a deeper look at Konechny in a hot minute. 75-point pace on the season. Underlines are fine, but nothing to write home about. He's got 6 points in his last 5, 18.5 minutes average time on ice. Pretty in line with the season long there. 154th shots per 60, 47th individual scoring chances for per 60, 205 in on ice expected goals for per 60, and 205th in individual expected goals for per 60, 74th in on ice expected goals for per 60. Playing on that line with Dvorak and Zegras, obviously not a bad place to apply your trade. This last game, they made the Tippett, Cates, Michkov, Barkey power play unit the quote-unquote top unit. Don't ask me why Rick Tocchet does the things he does. It doesn't make sense a fair bit of the time. I like Konechny. It probably depends on how badly you need what Jeek brings to the table in terms of the hits and the blocks and stuff. I see the logic here, and I don't mind it. But I think it's relatively even. It probably depends on if you need Jeek stuff more than what you need Konechny's extra points scoring from the wing, if that makes sense. I feel like I explained that pretty terribly. Konechny's got 63 hits in 49 games on the season. Whereas Joel Eriksson X has 73 hits, and how many games has he played? He's played 47 games. So a little bit better. It's not that big of a difference. I thought it was a bigger difference, to be honest with you. Yeah, I think I'm convincing myself here. I think I would take Konechny there. All right. I think we have made it to the end of another Puzzling Players live stream. Thanks to everyone for being here. That is going to be all that I've got for this episode, so hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick and 18 Skaters. Many thanks to Matt Creamer for supplying the music for the podcast. That's it, folks. Much love.